the stalemate in Bakhmut, the weakness of Ukrainians in Soledar. But what if all of this is just a mind-blowing genius plan of Ukrainians to ultimately crush Russians in the east? And we might potentially see the beginning of the chain reaction of disastrous events for Russians. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and see some most recent footage. And our first picture comes to us from the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, where the security services of Ukraine detained the laboratory of trolls. These people were spreading the fake news about the Ukrainian army mainly through Telegram channels. And their alleged salary was around 5,000 rubles, which is approximately $70 per month. Next we go deep inside Russia, to one of these small cities called Bratsk, where one of these previous nights the local people put on fire the military enlistment office. And this basically shows you that the resistance of the regular Russian people against this mobilization is still going on in one way or another. Next we go to already familiar Belgorod, where one of these previous days the Russian air defense system has been activated. And then right here is the satellite image from the Engels airport located in Saratov region, also Russia. And as you can see, Russians installed several defense barriers and the number of planes itself decreased significantly. For example, just a couple of months ago the number of planes was way more than 20, but this time it's only 4 Tu-95 and 2 Tu-160 bombers. The reason why Russians started to move away their planes further into the territory of Russia, it is because Ukrainians were constantly attacking these airfields in the last month. And these attacks are the appropriate response of Ukrainians to Russians destroying the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. But recently, such attacks by Russians are getting less and less effective, and one of the main reasons for this it is because they're quickly depleting their missile inventories. And right here, for example, we can see the picture presented us by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Oleksiy Reznikov, which shows the estimated number of missiles that Russians still have. And speaking about the Russian weapons, recently the developer of Kalibr missiles, Pavel Kamnev, has passed away. The conditions of his death are pretty unclear, just like with anyone else who passed recently who was closely related to Putin. And so pretty much yes, just as we moved into 2023, I can clearly see that there is some kind of escalation which is about to happen in the near future in the east. We will talk about this in more details in several minutes, but if you don't want to miss any of these updates as soon as they start happening in the future, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram because soon I'll be playing some hockey, so you can see how bad I am. But okay, before we talk about the situation in the east, let me give you a very quick update from the south, where recently it has been reported that Russians attacked Ochakiv, located in Mykolaiv region. And besides this, it has been mentioned that the fire spread to the ammunition warehouse of Ukrainians, which later detonated. As we move to the east, to Kherson city, one of these last nights, Russians used the incendiary ammunition against this city. And as always, the opinion of the people is divided between whether this is a white phosphorus or a thermite. So just please let me know in the comments what do you think it is. Next we go to Zaporozhye region, specifically to the area around Polohi. And as you can see right here, Russians were able to bring their front line away from this settlement. And as we move to the area to the west of Velika Novosilka, we can see the changes in territorial control in the last 24 hours as well. And then, according to the advisor to the president of Ukraine, Mykhailo Podolyak, Russians are ready to run away from Crimea. According to him, it is just a matter of time until Ukraine can establish the full fire control over this peninsula. But if you remember from my previous episode, at this very moment approximately only northern-eastern part of this logistics is covered by Ukrainian HIMARS. But as soon as Ukraine can start advancing deeper into Kherson and also from Zaporozhye region, this is when the rest of the northern logistics of Crimea will be disrupted by Ukrainians. And according to Mykhailo Podolyak, as soon as Crimean Peninsula is under full fire control by Ukrainians, this is when Russians will only have one escape route, which is obviously through Crimean Bridge. But then he also added that those Russians who are still currently living on this peninsula should start thinking about evacuating as soon as possible, because as we all know, Crimean Bridge is not as safe as it seems. So yeah, unfortunately, as you have seen, I had to blur some photos and videos due to still ongoing demonetization. The revenues for the previous period videos are still down 90 to 95%, that is why I had to figure out on my own whether blurring sensitive content helps or not. For this reason, I uploaded some of the uncensored footage to my Discord, and the rest will be available on my Patreon. And if you want to financially support the channel during these times, the links will be down below. Alright, and now as promised, let's talk about the situation in the east. And first of all, recently there has been an attack by Russians against a civilian marketplace in Kharkiv, which resulted in injuring 7 people. But Ukrainians had their response as well, and reportedly, according to Ukrainian sources, Ukrainians did an attack against the local abandoned school, which has been used by Russian soldiers as their temporary military base in Lantrativka, which resulted in anywhere between 70 to 100 Russian soldiers being lost. Our next stop brings us to already familiar Kramatorsk, where, if you remember last week, Russians reported destroying a Ukrainian military base, inflicting damages to more than several hundred Ukrainians. And recently, we received the official statistics by the Ministry of Defense of Russia about this event. And according to the Ministry of Defense of Russia, this attack has been the revenge for Makiyevka, and as a result of this, more than 600 Ukrainian soldiers have been eliminated. Because soon enough after this statement, the Ukrainian authorities released the satellite images which show that in fact empty, abandoned buildings have been targeted. And if you take a closer look at one of the pictures of the consequences, there is this basically explosion crater, literally next to, I don't even know what is this, just like a car garage. And I mean, okay, yes, this building, which was supposed to be allegedly the Ukrainian military base, it is no longer has any single window. But guess why? Because of the blast wave, not of the explosion itself. But the building itself, it still stands, which means I have no idea how they could have eliminated 600 Ukrainians. But okay, and now let's quickly talk about the most active battle zones in the east. And first of all, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, Russians continue their offensive operations along Svatove-Kreminny road in order to regain the lost positions. At the same time, as a result of a precise Ukrainian strike, a Russian military base has been reportedly destroyed in Rubizhne. But of course, the most active combat actions in the last several days have been happening around Soledar and Bakhmut. And we will talk about this in more details and why this can be a mind-blowing, genius plan by Ukrainians very soon. But as for now, the battle for Soledar is still going on, and as you can see from this map, the city center itself is still being defended. Reportedly, several elite Russian units have been redeployed to this settlement, which pretty much means that these are heroic actions by Ukrainian defenders who still protect Soledar. And reportedly, recently Ukrainians received reinforcements as well. At the same time, some military experts assume that the goal of Russia of taking Soledar is so that in the future they can encircle Bakhmut, which is pretty much the same idea that is happening right now in Andriivka, where if Russians are successful, they'll be marching towards Bakhmut from the south. But according to Ukrainian sources, these most recent gains of Russians in Soledar do not possess immediate threat to Ukrainians at being encircled in Bakhmut. And speaking about Bakhmut itself, even though the attention of Russians switched to Soledar, the battles still go on inside the city every single day. And right now, let's take a look at this map, which shows us the changes in territorial control in the last 24 hours. And first of all, as you can see right here, the great area to the west of Avdiivka has expanded, but Ukrainians were able to decontest the area to the east of Kamenka. Going more to the north, we can see that Ukrainians were able to decontest even more of its territories. But as we move closer to Bakhmut itself, we can see that Russians are getting predominantly successful in this area, specifically to the west of Andriivka. And then, going to another hotspot in the east, to Soledar, we can see that Russians continue the attempt to encircle this settlement from the south. Going to the northeast of Soledar, to Berestove, we can see that Russians advanced a little bit to the west. And as we move to the north, to the area around Bilohirivka, we can see that the changes in the front lines are a little bit more favorable to Russians. And ultimately, the front lines to the northwest of Svatove got a little bit closer to each other. Alright, so unfortunately yes, as you can see, Russians are getting a little bit more successful in the east of Ukraine. But what if this whole situation around Bakhmut and Soledar is just a mind-blowing, genius plan of Ukrainians to ultimately crush Russian forces in the east? All of this, what I'm about to say right now, are just my own assumptions and speculations, but I mean it's pretty interesting to entertain the idea that this might happen. So yeah, Ukrainians were able to pretty much stall the advancement of Russians in Bakhmut area. And I mean yes, they were able to do small gains here and there, but the most important thing is that this impenetrable fortress, Bakhmut, still stands. And knowing the love of the Russian government for such symbolic victories, and especially martyrs, Ukrainians are doing everything possible to not let Russians advance in this area. But they still try to do it. Or I mean, they try to continue trying, I guess, to do it. In the meantime, along the way, they suffer massive losses, just so that eventually, in the end, they will still fail to capture this trophy city. And seeing how exhausted and demoralized Russian soldiers are, Ukrainians, it looks like they decided that, okay, now we got it. Now it's our time to counterattack. So maybe, just maybe, this temporary success of Russians in Soledar is just Ukrainians intentionally showing weakness somewhere else. The whole idea is to bait Russians, shift their attention, and make them split their forces in this Bakhmut-Soledar area, at least partially. And I mean, just take a look how close these two cities are. So, long story short, Russians who see this success in Soledar, they'll be like, oh, okay, look, this is our new trophy city. And the Russian authorities will be even more ecstatic. They'll be like, finally, we can show some victory to our people. And to be honest, I already see it happening in Russian media as we speak. They talk less and less about Bakhmut and more about Soledar. It almost feels like that the Russian propaganda is preparing the minds of the Russian people for an upcoming victory in this settlement, or at least this is what they think, by constantly over and over mentioning the name Soledar. So that whenever Russians allegedly succeed in this city, the Sea Patriots will already be familiar with this name and its importance, as presented by Russian propaganda. But anyways, okay, let's get back to this area. Ukrainians who potentially show their intentional weakness in Soledar did this in order to switch the attention from Russians from Bakhmut and split their armies between these two settlements. And as soon as this relocation is complete, Ukrainians will most likely do everything possible to stall the advancement of Russians in Soledar as well. Because, I mean, defending is just generally easier than advancing, and we all already know how good Ukrainians at protecting themselves. And in fact, we do have some statements by the Ukrainian officials, such as Anna Malyar, the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, who is saying that yes, indeed, Russians are regrouping in this area, sending reinforcements, and bringing more and more attention against Soledar rather than Bakhmut. And since eventually there will be way fewer Russian soldiers around Bakhmut, this is when Ukrainians will switch to a counter-offensive mode and liberate this area. This will completely shatter the hopes and dreams of the Russian authorities, propagandists and Z-patriots at taking Bakhmut, and the main question in their minds will be, why is it us who spent so much time, several months, trying to take the city, while Ukrainians spent only a couple of weeks and took everything back? Without a doubt, this will also affect the minds of the Russian soldiers, especially in the east. And then, being massively demoralized, to say the least, Russians won't be able to take Soledar either. And then, one by one, Bakhmut, Soledar, Svatove, Crimea, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, and the rest of Lugansk region, or at least a very big part of it, will be under full control, liberated by Ukrainians. We might potentially see a disastrous chain reaction for Russians unfolding right now in front of our eyes as we speak, with the very first event being Russians switching their attention from Bakhmut to Soledar. And guess what? This might have happened thanks to this mind-blowing genius plan of Ukrainians by simply showing the intentional weakness in this settlement. It will be very interesting to see how the events will unfold in the near future, and if you don't want to miss any of these updates as soon as they start happening, just please once again subscribe to my channel. It only takes one click. And if you want to support my work due to ongoing demonetization, please consider becoming my channel member, use the PayPal link, or become my Patreon, where you'll receive early access to the uncensored footage. You can find all the other useful links to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.